I'm Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services, and welcome back to part 2 of Training Excellence. We did cover part 1 last week, so if you haven't seen that one, this was a bit of a high level on Standard 1.1, whereas today we are going to be going into the policy guidance, and we're going to be looking in a lot more detail. I'm actually going to be sharing that policy guidance document with you, and we're going to be going through some of those points together. I hope you guys find all of this helpful. As always, as you're going through this process, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. So we are talking about the new RTO standards, and specifically we're going to be looking at the Outcome Standards Policy Guidance document. This is not the user guide, so this was actually developed by DEWA. The user guide is still going to be coming out, but I think the policy guidance document does go into an awful lot of detail. So for those people who are looking to really understand the standards and think about how to put them into practice, this is a really good and helpful document. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share this with you guys now. So I'm hoping this all works good. Hopefully you guys can see that now. All right, cool. So this is the Outcome Standards Policy Guidance document. And what you'll see is like, if we go up through this, we talk about the quality area, the broad overview of the outcome area. Okay, that's what these are, they're outcomes. Because they're outcomes, they are definitely more gray in nature. And so it's important to do things like take into account the intent of that quality area, which I'm showing you guys now for those of you that can't see the screen. And then we go specifically into each of the areas. And as you can see, it really does start to break them out into a lot more detail. So when we look at Standard 1.1, that is training is engaging and well-structured, keywords there, and enables vet students to attain skills and knowledge consistent with the training product, okay? So obviously, ultimately, the goal and the evidence is going to be that you've got a solid assessment system that sits behind that, where you can demonstrate that the students have actually attained the skills and knowledge. This is obviously very important because as we have seen in the last little bit of 2024, there were several colleges that were shut down and students' certificates were actually cancelled. Thousands of student certificates were cancelled because it was clearly demonstrated that the students did not hold those competencies. They did not have those skills at the point in which the certification was issued. All right, so moving into Standard 1.1, the RTO demonstrates, and this is what we need to be thinking about in terms of evidence, right? The RTO demonstrates, 1, training is consistent with the requirements of the training product. So your assessment system is going to be part of that, but just having the assessment, you've also got to think about how you're actually going to train. So this is going to link into your training and assessment strategy, your timetables, your training results, things like that. The mode or modes of delivery enable students to gain skills and knowledge consistent with the training product. Okay, so again, if we're talking about training skills in commercial cookery, in childcare, in individual support, in any of the trade areas, right? How, if your only mode of delivery is online, how does that mode of delivery enable students to build those skills? And this is a really important factor to consider when we are thinking about if we're delivering online, how does the delivery online enable students to build that skill, right? How are we teaching students to build a skill, right? Training is structured and paced. Paced is an important word. To support vet students to progress, providing sufficient time for instruction, practice, feedback, and assessment. Now, this is probably one of the biggest changes that we have made to our training and assessment strategies in anticipation of the 2025 standards, all right? Whereas previously before, we outlined what the training was and what the assessment was. Under our new training and assessment strategy, when we get down into like a really big breakdown, we are actually breaking down each unit that we're covering in terms of when are we providing instruction, and what we've defined as instruction is when we're doing lectures with the students, when we're doing online training with the students, when we are talking to them about the underpinning knowledge of the units. Right, that's what we have defined as instruction. That's not defined by the standards. That's how we've defined it in our thing, right? And we've defined that in one of two ways. It's either synchronous, as in I'm talking to the student right now. So, if I was running this as a live YouTube, if I was doing this face-to-face, that's synchronous instruction. or it's asynchronous, okay, whereby, and for most of you, how you're going to be engaging with me now is you're engaging with me asynchronously. And what that means is that the RTO has taken time to develop resources, okay, which have, instruction. We talk about topics. We've got written material about context. We've got, some interactive online, engaging materials and stuff like that. And that's asynchronous instruction that is provided to the learner. Okay, so synchronous instruction provided to the learner and asynchronous, and we've thought about that in terms of the instruction piece. We've also then done it in terms of practice and feedback, and that is when the students are engaged, okay, in doing the thing. Okay, they're engaged in doing the thing and they're getting active feedback on that process. Generally, that is going to be a synchronous process whereby a trainer is observing them demonstrate a skill and they're refining and tweaking and giving the student feedback so that that skill is being improved. Okay, that can also be done in a workplace component by a supervisor as well. All right, so there could be multiple ways that the student is building those skills. Generally, when a student is building those skills and they're getting feedback on it, it has to be done in a synchronous manner. All right, there has to be a person there that knows how to do it properly that is providing them feedback on that. Okay, so we've got our instruction, we've got our practice and feedback. And then finally, once we've got a pretty good picture that they're ready for assessment, they then go into assessment and they're assessed as to whether or not they can do it to the training package requirements. And that's when our assessment system takes over. So when we look at the unit of competence, like when we look at how we've broken out the delivery of that unit of competency, here's our delivery modes, right? Each of our delivery modes will link to either synchronous or asynchronous, okay, done in, tandem with a person or not. The reason why we define it in terms of synchronous and asynchronous is primarily because, certainly from a funding perspective, the synchronous component is the part that most of the departments are looking at and what they're paying, okay? So, WA funding contracts, depending on the model that you're delivering, you need to deliver 30, 50 or 70% face-to-face of the nominal hours. That's that synchronous component, okay? The asynchronous component is like all of the online self-study sort of stuff, right? Again, from a CRICOS perspective, okay, you've got to have a minimum of 15 to 16 hours a week of synchronous study in the classroom or in the, synchronous study in the classroom or in the training area. You can have 4 hours, although ASCOR doesn't like it very much at the moment. They are providing a lot of pushback on that as to how you're monitoring and managing that. But defining it in terms of synchronous and asynchronous for us has been an easier way to explain that, because synchronous means there is an active interaction happening between the trainer and the student. Okay, asynchronous means that is a little bit more broken up. Okay, so that might be a handy tool for you guys. It might not, but we've got it in terms of synchronous or asynchronous, and then we've broken it out in terms of instruction, which relates to theory, practice and feedback, which relates to the practical, and then assessment, which relates directly to the time associated with the assessment practice. That may seem really complicated. However, in terms of meeting the new standards and in terms of being able to effectively explain how training occurs, okay, students absolutely want to know how that synchronous and asynchronous training is going to occur. You might not use that same terminology, but it's really important that students understand when they have to be having those interactions and when they're doing stuff in their own time, okay? It's important for trainers to understand that as well. It's important for the workplace to understand that. So in terms of being able to explain when things are happening and how things are happening, I think it's a really useful way to approach it. D is training techniques, activities and resources, engage, vet students and support their understanding, okay? So it used to be engaging and motivating in like the first version. I think taking out the motivating has probably been relevant. Engaging is still very subjective, and your evidence of engaging is going to vary substantially It could be in terms of, one metric for engagement could be attendance. Okay. Another metric could be participation and progression. Another metric could be via feedback mechanisms. I think in addition to our EQTF learner surveys, having some surveys go out for students in terms of the engagement that they thought, in how they personally engaged with the course, and trying to get like a baseline metric is going to be another important component there. And then E is where training product requires work integrated learning, work placements, or other community-based learning. Necessary skills and knowledge are able to be obtained in that environment. Okay. And again, this relates to the fact that we are going to have a lot more focus on making sure that workplaces are relevant, that they have the resources that they need. Almost no workplace is going to have everything. If we look at qualifications where students are and certain things they might have access to, but your timing as to how you're going to train students on it, is not going to be reasonable. So a couple of examples that I think about from the workplace is when we're dealing with different customers, when we're dealing with complaints and things like that, you're not always going to have that opportunity to observe it in the workplace. So, in these sorts of situations, have we got role plays and stuff like that we can work in? Access to finance and HR within a lot of organizations. If you're looking at, qualifications where they've got to manage others, where they've got to progress others, where they've got to performance manage others in particular, they may not have that capacity, where they've got to get access to things like P&Ls. A lot of businesses will not provide their employees with access to their P&L. And for some, like in HR, there's a lot of complexities in providing that information to students who are studying. Thinking about what the workplace is actually going to provide and what is then going to have to be provided, via like a simulation sort of a thing from the RTO. There's probably not enough thought process that goes into RTOs in relation to who's going to do what. Certainly Anna Wire, one of the things that we do is we create these really bespoke assessments. And so we spend a lot of time creating supporting documentation. We were doing advanced diploma of civil construction the other week. We're creating hydrological reports. We're creating meteorological reports. We're creating, all sorts of supporting documentation, okay, in order to be able to create a suitable enough simulated environment that students can run through an assessment. So I think that there are a lot of RTOs that do a very poor job of this. If you're just purchasing off the shelf material, really thinking about how much of this stuff is provided, what's not provided, what else needs to be developed and things like that is really important. Now then, for each of these points, again, we come back to under DWA, they've created an intent. Okay, so it's really, really important to understand this intent and take that into account when we're writing our policies and procedures and when we're setting out our governance structure. So ensuring training aligns with the requirements of the training product, okay, adopting a suitable mode of delivery, and that mode of delivery, we need to be thinking about the student cohort, okay, and that's pretty much what it says there. Identifying appropriate training structure and pacing to support vet students to progress, okay. And this to progress, if you've been in CRICOS and you've been in the funded space, this is nothing new to you. If you are in the online qualification space, this absolutely is probably new to you. It's going to be, it does bring about a really interesting discussion. There are a lot of RTOs that will, say to students, well, we will enroll you for 1 year. We're going to give you 1 year to complete this qualification. If you don't complete it in that year, you're going to have to pay an additional fee in order to extend. I think there's going to be a much stronger onus on RTOs if they're going to be adopting that strategy to really be able to provide some very, very clear evidence on how they are supporting the pace and support, what support they're providing to students in order to continue that. I think that's going to boil down to a lot more than we send them an email reminder every month. Okay, I think that's going to boil down to active coaching, phone calls, emails, text messages, opportunity for additional, training sessions and things like that. So I do think that our online art, if you are running online courses via your RTOs, there is going to need to be a real thought process that occurs in and around how training structure and pacing is going to occur and what support services are going to be in and around that. We'll talk about support services separately. Training techniques to engage vet students, as we talked about. So students are diverse, they've got varied learning needs, styles and preferences, utilising a range of training techniques, activities and resources in order to cater for students. Again, this is going to lead back into that support thing. Again, all of our RTO standards, they weave together, they continue to weave together like they've done previously. And activities that seek to engage, interest, energize, and involve students and enable them to build skills and knowledge in different ways. So again, I just think that being really clear on how we are providing instruction, practice, and feedback, taking into account learning needs of students, being able to clearly articulate who our cohort is, and where our cohort is Cert 3 students who maybe have typically lower levels of LLN, typically come from backgrounds who are not overly, academic in nature. We are going to need to be demonstrating how we are going to be engaging those students for skills. Okay, and that means getting them to do things. Really, really getting them to actually do things and not just doing them for the purpose of assessment, but doing them for that practice and feedback component is going to be really, really important. It does say assessment-only RTOs will not be required to demonstrate compliance with this standard as they do not design or deliver training. However, they must have an understanding of training strategies. I don't believe this will apply to very many RTOs. There are very few situations where a student can assessment only their way through an entire qualification. The vast majority of times we will find gaps whereby some sort of training needs to occur. It's rare. It's just very, very rare. So I would be very careful if you are thinking you can rely on this thing of, we really only do assessment only. I would be very, very careful. So, but that is standard 1, guys, in a lot more detail. As I said, you've got your policy. Take your outcomes policy standards guidance into consideration as part of this process. Make sure you've had a good read through it. The AQTF, the ASQA user guide will be coming out as well. That's going to provide even more guidance on it. So there is going to be a lot of educational resources that are going to allow you to take that into account. That will help to prepare you for audit. I'm certainly not the only one that's doing series on the standards. I know that, Angela at Vivacity has got stuff coming out. I know that, the girls at Hawkeye will be doing some stuff. I know that certainly, Mark Ratcliffe at Mr. Ware, Dan Hill at Spec Training, they are all going to be providing a huge amount of professional development for trainers in how to understand a lot of this stuff. So there is certainly no shortage of, resources and educational resources out there for you to be able to understand and think about how this is going to be applied in context of performance audits and performance assessments and things like that. So you turn around and say, I didn't know, it's not gonna pass muster. We've come out of the nice era where the regulator was giving a lot of grace in that little post-COVID period. There is a strong expectation that you are going to be able to demonstrate compliance with these standards and that you are going to be able to explain how that standard correlates with the student experience and what evidence you're collecting of it. And if you can answer confidently both of those questions, then I think you'll be doing really well. If you can't, I think you're going to be in trouble and you deserve to be in trouble. So that's just my thoughts on it. If you guys do have any questions, like always, feel free to drop them in the comments below and I will attempt to answer them. Feel free to disagree and duke it out, but do so respectfully. If you've got any questions, you can always email myself or you can reach out to Laura NOI.org, and we are happy to have a conversation and see how we can help you support better practices within your RTO. I hope you guys have found this helpful and that you're having a wonderful 2025. We will keep continuing on with this series. My name is Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services.